Hello, this is Jay Mitchell with another episode of Libertarian Censored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Censored subreddit. And first we have, if Charlie Kirk was alive today, they'd call him a traitor. Charlie hated the idea of war with Iran, and he made his views quite clear. The neocons have hijacked Charlie's voice to push their disgusting war narrative, posted by Rebel Always, and that looks like a video from Charlie Kirk's show of the text. Incredible if Charlie Kirk was still alive to decide that the Neocons would call him traitor. Charlie was waking up and he was speaking out against war and war. And yeah, personally, I definitely do think, Charlie Kirk, if he was still alive, maybe he would be speaking against the Iran war. But I don't think it really matters too much because a lot of Trump adjacent people are speaking out against the Iran war, but doesn't really seem to be making too much of a dent in the Trump's fervor for pushing for it. And yeah, it just goes to show you that Trump might have campaigned on no new wars and America first, but he gets into office and he's suddenly all about going to war and Israel first instead of America first. This goes to show you that politicians might say one thing on the campaign trail, but they'll do the opposite when they get elected. It just goes to show you that ultimately democracy is just pretty much theater. That they'll say one thing on the campaign trail and then stab you in the back once they get into power, and that's often how politics works. Next we have, to all you quote-unquote libertarians on here who repeat the trope that MAGA was a cult who blindly followed Trump and are still following Trump in his war in Iran, left, that's the core of Trump supporters still left, Trump supporters still left, right, those of us in MAGA who oppose the Iran war in Israel, posted by Rebel Always, and that looks like a picture of, Trump and a few of his supporters who still support the Iran war and all that, and then a bunch of other people who are supposedly MAGA but are against the Iran war. And then the OP added, "So your preconceived notions are wrong. Now you have no excuse to be ignorant. In fact, it's not one. Now these of us on the far right who most vehemently oppose the war in Iran and Israel's influence. In fact, you don't hear people on the left talk about Israel or the Zionists hardly at all. That'd be bigoted or anti-Semitic, or according to your thinking." I think they meant anti-Semitic there instead of anti-Semitic, but regardless, I definitely do think, you can be, if you want to call yourself MAGA and be against the Iran war, I think that's completely fine. But, the problem is that when you call yourself MAGA, it's going to be kind of be inherently entwined with Trump. That's why I think I hear a lot of people who are against the Iran war, but more MAGA leaning, they're calling themselves America First now instead. But, that runs into the problem of, it might be more entwined with Nick Fuentes since his show is called America First. So ultimately, I think, the problem with politics is that, people are too overly reliant on labels. If you want to make a label for yourself like MAGA or America First, you should be able to, or Libertarian for that matter. But the problem is that, you can't just let that label define you. You always have to think as an individual first and foremost. And yeah, personally, labels can be useful, but I definitely do think in American politics today there's definitely an over-reliance on labels, as I just said. Next we have Thomas and Alito take a regrettable position in a qualified immunity case from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't agree with Thomas and Alito on anything, but ultimately, I think the big problem here in general is that we have a Supreme Court with lifetime appointments. In reality, I don't think we should have any courts because, the courts are too powerful and they can just decide to interpret laws however they feel like. Usually with an activist bent, a lot of left-wing judges are particularly bad at when it comes to using the courts to just push judicial activism, but the right-wingers can be bad at that too. But regardless, I definitely do think that the libertarian position is, ultimately I don't think courts should be the ones settling law. People should be settling laws amongst themselves, or settling their disputes amongst themselves, I just would say, rather than, letting the courts rule on however they feel like on whatever given case they're doing any given day. And that's my thoughts there. Next we have, does reporting bad news about the Iran war make you a foreign agent from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, personally, if the people want to say that, reporting bad news about the Iran war makes you a foreign agent, I think that's fine, believe whatever you want to. But I definitely do think foreign agent / asset is definitely one of the most overused smears that these days, people call, Reddit and the DNC shills, they'll call anyone who dissents at all a Russian asset. The RNC shills will call anyone who dissents at all a Chinese asset. But in reality, I would say, the foreign agents who we should most be concerned about are the Israeli assets, which seems to be the majority of the U.S. government these days, and that's my thoughts there. Next, we have Israeli minister confirms goal of large-scale expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza from TheGuardian.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I don't think Israel should be exposing Palestinians from Gaza, but ultimately, that's how the force works sometimes. If the government has the force to do something, and they have the arms to do so, ultimately there's nothing you can do a lot of the time. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, we should just be out of there entirely. We shouldn't be giving money to Israel, but we shouldn't be giving money to Palestine either. If individual taxpayers want to earmark their money to do it Israel or Palestine, I guess I think that would be fine. But right now, our government's pouring money into Israel, and along with a few $8 for Palestine as well, and I don't think that's the libertarian position. The libertarian position is, the U.S. needs to be out of the Israel-Palestine conflict entirely, same with every other global conflict that's outside our borders. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Megyn Kelly continues to embarrass herself, posted by Serious Meaning 5220, and that's a YouTube video looks like a link to YouTube video from Stella Mags. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for Megyn Kelly. She can be decent on the Iran war. Not as decent as some other MAGA adjacent types like, Dave Smith or Nick Fuentes. But, ultimately, if Reddit wants to say she's going to continue to embarrass herself, she said, Trump can nuke another country and she'd still vote Republican, ultimately, I think it's a problem that a lot of people have, their party can do anything and they'd still vote for them. The 40% of people are going to go Republican no matter what, 40% of people are going to go Democrat no matter what. And a lot of Redditors are pretty much the same thing like her. They're going to go Democrat no matter what, even if the Democrats got us into World War III. And it just goes to show you that, we need to move on from these two parties. But sadly, I think it's just too built into the people at this point, especially since they've been the two major parties for coming up on 200 years now. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have international crackdown on free speech from HopeGirlBlog.com, posted by Am Freedom Foundation, and they said the UK has gone fully authoritarian on their own citizens, arresting an average of 12,000 people per year for saying anything online they deem offensive. They are also threatening to do the same to anyone in the US, as if they can extend their horrible and unjust laws across the ocean. But this sort of thing became normalized in the US as well, with both major political parties increasingly authoritarian and anti-free speech. Are we in danger of the same here? And yeah, personally, I would say that we probably are in danger of the same here. Some people might say, what about First Amendment? But, the government's found a way around the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, whenever it feels opportune. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for it. I know it's interesting. A lot of people, they say they support the First Amendment, but the left will go, I support the First Amendment as long as it's not hate speech or misinformation. Well, a lot of people on the right will go, I support the First Amendment as long as it's not anti-Semitism. And it just goes to show you that people, they have no principles, only teams. That they want to censor speech they disagree with. But suddenly they'll cry the First Amendment when they're the ones getting censored. And yeah, it's interesting how Reddit, they're trying to say, we support free speech, but they ban anyone for any dissent at all. This subreddit I do the podcast, so I get the post from for this podcast. They banned me for almost 2 years now, and they don't see any irony in that whatsoever. And it just goes to show you that ultimately, the government censorship isn't right, but ultimately, if the Democrats were in power and they were the ones doing the one censoring, Reddit would be clapping their hands and cheering. And it just goes to show you that you can't take these people seriously. They just want authoritarianism. They just want that's what a lot of people. That's the problem for a lot of people. They just want a dictator they agree with, instead of a dictator they disagree with. And yeah, that's my thoughts there. Next, we have Trump's trade war caused a $15 million decline in U.S. foreign sales to China from Reason.com, posted by Jaya Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't think we should be in a trade war with China. I think, but ultimately, that the government can institute whatever trade war it wants to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. Same with tariffs and all the other ways they can control international trade. But yeah, personally, I think if the U.S. and China want to do business with each other, U.S. farmers and Chinese farmers, I think they should be able to. Ultimately, it comes down to who has the resources and means to do what. And sadly, when it comes to the government, they're usually the ones with the resources and means to do whatever they want to, and that usually can lead to going against stuff like free trade. If free trade does have some drawbacks. Things can be made in China for cheaper. And a lot of times, the Chinese products get government subsidies. So, ultimately, I do think people should try and buy local if possible. But, I definitely do think if you want to buy cheaper from China, you should be able to. And the government shouldn't be charging you a tax, or which tariffs are. Tariffs are a tax on imported goods. If you don't feel like paying it, but ultimately, they're the ones in the position with the authority to enforce whatever tariffs or taxes they want to, and oftentimes, there's nothing you do about it. Same for pretty much everything else they do. Next, we have White House intervention bolsters Trump Jr. connected rare earth farm from Potato.org, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't think the White House should be bolstering Trump's son's rare earth firm, but ultimately that's how government works a lot of times. It's going to be self-serving and reward those who are close to members serving, and that's how government contracts often work. They'll go to people who are close to members of the government, friends or family, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about that. That's ultimately how government works. They're going to naturally use the state to enrich themselves and their friends and families, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it since they're in a position of authority and you aren't. Next, we have Trump loves accusing critics of treason. U.S. law makes that charge hard to prove for good reason, from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, if Trump wants to accuse critics of treason, I think he should be able to do so. I think that's freedom of speech. But, I definitely do think, treason should be something that's hard to prove. Ultimately, but ultimately it comes down to what whenever the government says it is. If they're willing to enforce Trump's definition of treason of being anyone critical of him, ultimately I don't think that would be right. But ultimately, those in positions of state authority can justify enforcing whatever bullshit laws they want to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. As I say pretty much every one of these posts. Next, we have the least surprising headline ever: blowing up boats hasn't slowed cocaine traffic to U.S. from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't think the U.S. should be just blowing up boats to stop the drug trade. But ultimately, if the U.S. wants to blow up whatever boats it wants to for whatever reason, ultimately they can justify doing whatever they want to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. Next, we have Trump's posed $2 $50 bills, everything the founders despise, from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, if Trump wants to have a $250 bill of himself on it, I personally don't think we should have that. But ultimately, if the government wants to justify minting that, the government's in control of the mint, so ultimately they can mint whatever they want to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. I personally wouldn't care for it. But ultimately, I think it's why we need money out of the government. Stuff like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, because right now the government has too much control over money, and they can make whatever money they want to, even if it has Donald Trump on it. And sometimes there's nothing you can do about it since they're the ones printing the money, and you aren't. Next, we have what is their game plan when we're all too poor to afford their products? Are they stupid? Posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's crossed from the American Hard Mode subreddit. It looks like a tweet from the Associated Press. In Alabama, the man frying chicken at KFC and the woman making beds at Holiday Inn could be a prisoner. The state earns millions leasing inmates to hundreds of companies, deeming them safe enough to work, but originally denying them parole. And then the description on topic says, they're planning to expand them out to every fucking state as soon as possible. It's why the SCOTUS rule that being homeless is allowed to be criminalized, making it real easy to target scoop up like 800K new workers to lease. And yeah, personally, I don't know, if the government wants to lease out prisoners to private companies, I think they should be able to. But ultimately, it does come down to who is the force to do what. If you're a prisoner, I don't think you should be forced to work at a KFC or a Holiday Inn if you don't want to. But the government's ultimately in control of you. That's why you probably shouldn't have ended up in prison. I do feel kind of bad, but you probably shouldn't have ended up in a government-run prison in the first place. and that's just, or private kids to private prison, you probably shouldn't have ended up there, where it's always like, oh, think of prisoners' rights. Well, in reality, prison's not supposed to be an enjoyable place to be. I definitely do think, you can make the argument that, the taxpayer-funded prisons shouldn't be leasing convicts to private-run companies, but, you definitely do have to remember that a lot of prisoners probably do deserve to be there, and, if they I think, if they want to voluntarily work there, they should be able to, but I don't think they should be forced to work there if they don't want to, and that's my thoughts there. So let's see if there's anything news. Looks like there's nothing new, so we're gonna wrap up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.